Louis "Pretty" Amberg, an enigmatic figure of the 1930s, possessed an unconventional appearance that defied societal norms. Despite the label of ugly, Amberg exuded a commanding presence that left an indelible impression on those who crossed his path, including figures like Dutch Schultz and Jack Legs Diamond. Within the shadowy realm of Prohibition-era America, his unconventional charm and notorious reputation propelled him to the forefront, ensuring his place among the legends of the criminal underworld. Louis Amberg was born in Russia in 1898, and when he was 5 years old, he arrived in New York with his parents, his 4 brothers and 1 sister. They joined the dozens of immigrants in the Lower East Side, and when his father had made enough money selling fruit and vegetables from a cart, they moved to the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. Amberg started selling fruit and veg on his own at the age of 10. He had a distinctive method of marketing, knocking on doors and kicking them until someone opened. He would push the fruits and veggies in his hands in front of him while growling, "Buy." People often bought after gazing into little Louis's scary-looking eyes. Amberg was known to be a bully from an early age, and he realized soon enough that only suckers worked for a living. Amberg was the dread of Brownsville by the time he became 20 years old, and not just because he was cruel and repulsively ugly. In fact, a representative from Ringling Brothers offered him a job with the circus as the missing link. Surprisingly, Amberg chose to brag about the offer rather than killing the man. He started out selling dirty postcards, and just after Prohibition became law in 1920, he started bootlegging with his partner, who was also his brother, Joe, known to be the Brains. Their business took off well, using the technique of threatening speakeasy owners to buy their brand of booze or they would face the consequences. The Ambergs were also in the loan-sharking business, which was more profitable, where they would charge a 10 or 20% interest per week. As Joe counted out the money, Pretty Amberg would snarl at the borrower, "I will kill you if you don't pay us back on time." Amberg was arrested twice between 1920 and 1926 for carrying concealed weapons. His second brother, Jaime the Rat, shot himself dead in 1926 during an unsuccessful breakout attempt from the Tombs. His third brother, Oscar, was charged for passing the gun into the jail for Jaime, but was never convicted, and he would slowly fade away from public view. The fourth brother, William, was the only brother apparently not in the crime business. He was a proprietor of a furniture business. Louis and Joe were so successful that they expanded their loan-sharking activities to Borough Hall in downtown Brooklyn. Amberg was Pitkin Avenue's king, and his idea of fun was to walk into a cafeteria and spit in people's soup. If a diner objected, Pretty Louis Amberg would tilt the entire bowl on his lap. Even Martin Bugsy Goldstein, who would soon establish himself as one of Murder Incorporated's deadliest killers, accepted Amberg's assault in silence. Abe Relis, a stool pigeon for the famous Murder Incorporated, later admitted to the authorities, saying, "The word was that Pretty was nutty." Pretty Amberg quickly became wealthy and well-known in his local area. Since he never left a tip of less than $100, waiters competed to serve him. Amberg increased the scope of his illicit enterprise by offering a laundry service to Brooklyn businesses. Even though his rates were high, he gave them a deal they couldn't pass up, that is, by using his laundry they stayed in business. Some sardonic journalists thought that Pretty Amberg entered the laundering business solely to stock up on laundry bags for all of his deceased victims. It is a proven fact that laundry bags filled with bodies began to appear all over the streets of Brooklyn during those times. One of the victims was an Amberg loan shark client who owed $80 in arrears. When Pretty Amberg was arrested on suspicion of murder, he laughed it off, saying he tipped more than that, and why would he kill a bum for a lousy $80? His guiding principle was to rip off late-paying clients for very modest sums. In this manner, he would lose very little money on his initial investment, but at the same time, larger debtors would receive the message. Police were fully aware of this but were unable to produce any evidence, and Pretty Amberg was released. In the early 1930s, Pretty Amberg established his territory from other criminals. Because of how the Depression had affected organized crime, the majority of its leaders were looking for new ways to make money. Oni Madden, a notorious racketeer, once confessed to Pretty that he had never been to Brownsville in his life and proposed that he come out and show him around. "Tell you what, Oni, if I ever see you in Brownsville, I'll rip your heart out on the spot," said Pretty, who was at the time slicing a steak. Jack Legs Diamond also made a fuss about moving into the area. Pretty Amberg told him they'd be friends, but if he ever stepped foot in Brownsville, he'd kill him and his girlfriend, his missus, and his whole damn family. The Amberg's mother had by then already changed her last name to Mandel, out of embarrassment for her son's growing notoriety. Pretty Amberg had survived a fusillade of shots fired while he was sitting in his car on a Brooklyn street. However, his bodyguard was killed. Pretty Amberg was struck by 3 bullets and told police he had no idea who the perpetrator was, but secretly he blamed Jack Legs Diamond. The financial strains grew greater with the repeal of Prohibition. Dutch Schultz told Amberg that he believed they should be partners in Brooklyn at that point, when his business had become essentially nothing more than a multi-million-dollar numbers scam, based in Harlem. Pretty replied, "Arthur, why don't you put a gun in your mouth and see how many times you can pull the trigger?" These remarks were insufficient to deter someone as tough as the Dutchman. Benjamin Holinsky and Frank Dolick, 2 of his men, were placed in a new loan office in Borough Hall in 1935, only a block away from the Amberg operation. However, within 24 hours at 174th Street and 3rd Avenue in the Bronx, the 2 were riddled with bullets. The Amberg-Schultz showdown began in September 1935, when a butcher named Irving Amron failed to repay a loan he made from the Ambergs. After Pretty Amberg threatened to kill him, Amron asked one of the Dutchman's henchmen to intervene. However, Pretty Amberg killed them both, and the Dutchman swore to get even. On September 30, 1935, Joe Amberg and his chauffeur bodyguard, Morris Kessler, were lined up against a wall, St. Valentine's Day Massacre style, and shot to death by a hit squad reportedly led by psycho gunman Albert Stern. On October 12, 1935, Pretty Amberg's most trusted lieutenant, Frank Teitelbaum's body was found in a brass trunk after it was tossed from a speeding automobile under the Brooklyn Bridge. A police autopsy showed that Teitelbaum had been beaten to death with blunt objects, including a blunt axe, and again reportedly responsible was Albert Stern, under the orders of the Dutchman. The Dutchman was shot on October 23, 1935, while he was at the Palace Chop House restaurant at 12 East Park Street in Newark, New Jersey, with Otto Berman, his accountant, Abe Landau, his new chief lieutenant, and his personal bodyguard, Bernard Lulu Rosenkrantz. The Dutchman died the following day, on October 24, 1935. Pretty Amberg was killed in the interim also on October 23, 1935, allegedly on Schultz's instructions. His body, which had been completely burned, was pulled out from a burning car on a Brooklyn street. His neck, arms, and legs were all wrapped in wire, and it would take many days before he was identified. It was never determined whether Pretty Amberg's death was a Schultz job or the orders of the crime syndicate led by Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky. Another legend held that he had been killed by a band of irate armed robbers after joining them in a significant job and taking most of the loot for himself. In the end, most people in Brooklyn agreed that it was past time, that somebody did something about Louis Pretty Amberg.